Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, let's just be clear what this bill actually does. We had a very grandiose speech from Mr Goldsmith, very little of it based in reality. This bill will save people 35 cents a year on cheque duty. Oh. That's the first thing. So 35 cents a year savings by abolishing cheque duty. That's what this bill does. That'll fix inequality, that's quite right. And when it comes to affordable housing, $3,500 that the government can't even guarantee will be passed on to people who are building houses. There's no guarantee that the ticket won't be clipped on the way through and that homeowners will actually see the benefit of that. But my colleague Phil Twyford will talk more about that in his speech. Let's just put the facts on the table about the last Labor government. 9 surpluses in 9 years. 9 surpluses in 9 years. Zero net debt. Zero net debt. We paid the debt off while the National Party was screaming at us to give tax cuts. And we didn't. We paid the debt down because we knew that when a rainy day came, like the global financial crisis, we needed to be prepared. We were incredibly exposed. And the only reason we've come through the global financial crisis as well as we have has been because of the last Labor government's economic management. Lowest unemployment in the OECD. Now, we've committed to getting us back to below 4% unemployment. The National Party says it can't be done. Guess what? Over 5 years, we average below 4%. It can be done if you want to do it, if you care enough to do it, and if you take economic development and unemployment seriously. But I want to talk about part 2 of this bill, because as my colleague Grant Robertson said, this bill should have gone to a select committee. Had it gone to a select committee, it would have given the forestry sector the opportunity to appear before the committee and say, why do you hate us so much? Why do you continue the sustained attack on our industry? Because what looks like a very innocuous piece of legislation is actually a vicious attack, once again, on the forestry sector. The only sector in this country that has been doing the heavy lifting on greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So the whole reason that we came out of the first commitment period of Kyoto in the black wasn't because of government policy, because in fact government policy, as we know, will only result in a 0.4% reduction of emissions compared to doing absolutely nothing at all. So we're basically doing absolutely nothing at all. We're doing 0.4% better than absolutely nothing. So the only reason we came out net positive was because of forestry. So why does the government keep attacking and undermining the forestry sector? Because what they're doing is they're stopping the forestry sector who earn NZUs when they plant trees, stopping them from when they deregister or harvest those trees from using these cheap international units in their place and then basically pocketing the difference. Now, of course, we don't want that to happen, but the reason it's happening is because there is such a big price differential between the Kyoto unit and the New Zealand unit. That's the actual problem here. And this government, for 5 years, has done absolutely nothing about it. They voted against amendments that Labor has put up to stop that, to restrict these cheap international units across the board to everyone, which would help fix the problem. They oppose that. But when it comes to the forestry sector, they're going to say to them, you don't get access to those cheap units. But guess who does get access to them? Their big, heavy emitting industry mates. Their mates get access to those cheap units to meet their obligations. So they're given a free allocation of NZUs to help transition them into the ETS, 90%. They get NZUs. They can then use these cheap units to meet their pollution obligations and pocket the difference. So it's okay for the mates of the National Party to engage in what's called arbitrage, but God forbid that forestry should do it, the one sector who's actually doing something about reducing emissions. So I would like to know, the Minister for the Environment's in the House, I would like to know why this doesn't apply to everyone. She's desperately pretending to be reading something. Why does this not apply to everyone? Why does this not apply to all people in the emissions trading scheme? Why pick on Forestry, Minister?
She doesn't know.
She doesn't know, she doesn't care. We know why, because they hate forestry and they love big industry. These are their mates, it's Rio Tinto. They've already given them a big taxpayer subsidy. We should not be surprised at all that they're also prepared to let them continue to speculate on these emissions units when they're clamping down on forestry. And the Minister said this is an unintended consequence of the ETS. What a load of garbage. This is not unintended, this is deliberate. They have deliberately let the carbon price collapse. They have deliberately let these cheap Kyoto units flood into the country. They have deliberately not stopped that from happening. So to say it's an unintended consequence is deeply misleading, and I'm being polite when I say that. So one of the reasons they talk about is the fiscal risk, that there is a fiscal risk to the Crown, and that's true, of not clamping down on this arbitrage. And they estimate from about $11 million to $66 million. But when you look at the arbitrage that's being carried out by the other sectors that hold NZUs, what's the fiscal risk for that? Well, the fiscal risk for that is $107 million. Yeah. So $107 million fiscal risk by the NZUs held by their mates versus between $11 to $66 million of fiscal risk from forestry. So which one of those are we clamping down on today? Is it the $107 million or is it the $11 million? No, we're clamping down on the $11 million so that their cronies can continue to engage in arbitrage, and they are not going to do anything about it, while they're quite happy to once again take a whack at the forestry industry, who are crucial in our battle against avoiding the worst. Well, apparently the forestry industry aren't in the Cabinet Club, clearly, because if they were, we probably wouldn't be passing this piece of legislation. So another reason we're doing this is because of the reputation risk to the ETS. The risk of the reputation of our emissions trading scheme being defiled by the forestry sector engaging in speculation on NZUs. The biggest reputation risk to the ETS is that lot sitting over there. Our ETS has no reputation now. It has no credibility. It has been completely undermined. It is nothing more than a fig leaf. The ETS's reputation went out the door long ago when this national government was elected. So to say that we're going to clamp down on one small industry, an industry that is doing very, very positive things in terms of climate change, and that will somehow restore the reputation of the emissions trading scheme, is laughable. Absolutely laughable. Our emissions trading scheme, it was designed to put a price on carbon. If it's not going to do that, then why have it, quite frankly? I bet you it's costing us more to run than it's actually achieving. But the thing was, when the ETS was first introduced by the last Labor government, we had a price on carbon of around $20, $25. That was what sparked off the wind industry in New Zealand. That price on carbon gave them the advantage, that they needed to really take off. And that's entirely what the emissions trading scheme was designed to do. It's not doing that now because this government has allowed the price of carbon to be completely suppressed. And the reason they say that they're not prepared to act on that is because they want to reduce costs to struggling businesses and households. So they say if you have a proper price on carbon, that's going to feed through to electricity and fuel bills. But what they don't tell you is that consumers are being charged carbon prices well in excess of the actual carbon price by fuel companies and by energy companies. So, and they've done nothing about that. They're quite happy to let the fuel companies and the energy companies price gouge consumers, because what we know is the price of carbon is currently about 35 cents. But from what we've heard, and this all comes from anecdotal evidence that we've heard from people, consumers are currently being charged between $15 and $25 a tonne at the petrol pump and through their power bills for carbon, despite the fact that the emissions that they are surrendering are 35 cents. Wow. So in fact, any benefits of a collapsed price on carbon are not being passed on to struggling businesses and households at all. And again, what have they done about that? Absolutely nothing. So this is what looked like an innocuous piece of legislation is actually the exact opposite. And what makes it even worse is here is a sustainable forestry bulletin from the Ministry of Primary Industries telling people how to register and deregister their forests. So the very thing that we're clamping down on today, the Ministry for Primary Industries has been promoting as early as February this year. So I think I can understand why the foresters are angry. I can understand why they might have had reason to believe that the government was okay with them doing this, given that government literature tells them how to do it and gives them tips on things to consider when removing and re-registering. And I understand why they're probably a little bit shocked that under urgency this is going through with no select committee process, with no consideration about what the impact might be on the very sector that we are still hugely reliant on to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, because this government is doing absolutely nothing else.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.